Okay. Where was I? So let's look at the nature of groups. As I've just mentioned just now, a few seconds earlier, that when we talk of groups, there are different explanations that have been given by different scholars who looked particularly at group dynamics, who looked particularly at how groups are formed and for what purpose groups are formed. And therefore, there are diverse ways of explaining what a group is. But essentially and very, very simplistically, a group, as all of us are members of one group or the other, or rather, some of us even, in fact, are members of multiple groups. So when we talk of groups, a group is nothing but an aggregate or a collection of individuals. That is a simplistic explanation of what a group is. A group is an aggregate or a collection of individuals. Okay? And not only that, a group is not necessarily just a collection of individuals or an aggregate of people, but these individuals who congregate or who aggregate or who make up a group are bonded together to a certain degree. So for example, if you are waiting for a cup of coffee or tea outside the canteen, okay, in the past, the central canteen. So people who are milling around the cash counter can also be looked at as a group. Why? Because there is a collection of individuals, therefore making a group. But this group might not necessarily bond with each other. They might not even, the people who are standing there, or a set of students or teachers standing there waiting for their cup of tea or cup of coffee, are not necessarily familiar with each other. They might not even know each other. So there, the sense of bond or affinity or closeness is absent. Okay, but nonetheless, it can be seen to constitute or make up a group. But Haslam, one of the researchers who has done a lot of work in group and particularly group identity or group identities, has essentially outlined that when we talk of groups, it is not just an aggregate or collection of people or individuals, but these individuals who make up the group, okay, are bonded to each other. There is a sense of closeness, of affinity with each other to a certain degree. So that group becomes a coherent unit. Okay, it becomes a coherent unit. And moreover, when we talk of the nature of a group, one must also understand, like I said, that group members also interact with each other. So people standing on a bus stop waiting for a bus is also a group. Why? Because it is a collection of individuals who are waiting to board a bus. Okay? But when they start interacting with each other verbally or even non-verbally, they smile at each other or wave at each other, then the collection of individuals waiting for the bus becomes a much more coherent unit. It becomes a much more coherent unit. And hence one would say that the ability to interact with each other, the likelihood of interacting with each other, makes the group also more cohesive and strong. Are you all with me? Okay. So in this context, one would say that social interaction is essentially a very, very important element when we talk of the nature of a group. So it's not just people standing together, but people interacting with each other, verbally or non-verbally. Thereby, it is through this interaction that they can influence each other. So influence also becomes an important part of group dynamics. Okay, so again, I'm just repeating, when we talk of groups, okay, or the nature of a group, an aggregate or collection of individuals make up a group. Further, when the group members bond with each other and are close to each other in proximity, and they interact with each other verbally or non-verbally, the group or the unit becomes much more coherent. Much more coherent. And not only that, the group members through the process of interaction are also influencing each other. Okay? So all of these different elements of collecting together, of comprising of members that make up a group who not only bond with each other but also interact, and through such interaction influence each other. This is how the nature of a group can be understood. Do you follow? Yes?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now let's look at certain characteristics of a group. Okay. When we talk of understanding the inherent nature of a group, that means how do groups, in what manner are groups formed? One must also understand that there are certain key elements or certain key characteristics that can be understood when we try to understand the concept or notion of what a group is. So the first characteristic that one can actually understand, or it is important rather to understand, is of course the fact that groups have purpose. So every group has a purpose. Okay, like I said very simplistically, an informal group, which is a collection of individuals who are people, let's say, standing waiting for a bus, or people, let's say, for example, buying a ticket to watch a movie, they are also a group. Why? Because they congregate, and the collection of individuals, the many individuals gathered there at one place at one time for a specific purpose, that is waiting for a bus, to board a bus, or essentially even to do what? Or essentially to buy a ticket for a movie. The purpose is there, and that purpose essentially is a key characteristic that make up a particular group. So groups also have a purpose for their existence, and hence it is through these purposes or a purpose that a group has that determines the functions of the group. So the purpose of the group also determines the functions of the group. And of course, the purpose will also differ from group to group. For example, you all are a coherent, cogent group of BA semester 3 psychology students. Okay, so the purpose is to acquire or obtain a degree. Okay, or to even, let's say, for example, pass or qualify the subjects as part of semester 3. Okay, so that is the purpose of the group. So the purpose of the group would differ from group to group, and it would also be reliant on the nature and type of the group. For example, instrumental groups, they exist for a specific purpose, hence the term instrumental. Okay, you also have instrumental groups. For example, I'm giving you one type of group or one classification of group, which is the instrumental group or groups. And these groups, instrumental groups, they are actually formed for a specific purpose. Let's say, for example, let's say in the earlier days, not in the last 4 or 5 years, or in fact almost a decade, but in the earlier times, for admission there used to be an interview, even for particularly at the master's level, okay, at the MA level. So the panel of the panel of experts, let's say 4 or 5 or 6 individuals who will interview the candidate or the applicant, would constitute a group, a small group. So that group would be an instrumental group. It has been formed for a specific purpose, which is to interview and then choose the candidate for what? Choose the candidate for selection into a particular course of study. Or the jury groups, if you watch movies on law and order, or on you can say movies that have a legal aspect to the story, you'll find that juries, particularly in the American system, we don't have it in India, but in the American system or even in the British system, for example, juries are constituted or formed for the specific purpose of doing what? Of trying the defendant and to render a verdict, guilty or not guilty. So juries would be also an instrumental group. The purpose of such groups would be to come to a particular decision or to arrive at a particular decision. And therefore, once the goal of decision making is achieved, they will then disperse. So the jury breaks up, or the panel of interviewers breaks up. Are you all with me? So in this context, this is how an instrumental group functions by way of a particular purpose. You also have, of course, another type of group, which is an affiliative group, which is a little different from the instrumental group. The affiliative group or groups, on the other hand, would be one that is formed for social reasons. That is formed for social reasons. Yes, Raza, you have a question? Tell me.
Yeah, ma'am. Yeah. Ma'am, I'm telling कि जो बच्चे लोग जो जेई मेंस का एग्जाम देने के लिए गए थे वो भी एक ग्रुप हो सकते हैं नहीं?
Yes.
जेई मेंस का एग्जाम नीट का बट वो लोग तो इंडिविजुअली मेम सर मैम बट वो लोग इंडिविजुअली तो आपस में बात तो किए नहीं, इंटरेक्शन तो हुआ नहीं.
True. As I've said earlier, that the very basic explanation, I think you are somewhere outside or whatever, Raza, because it's very, the audio is, your audio is a little disturbing. So, essentially, Raza is right that yes, let's say students who are giving the NEET exams or any kind of entrance exam, they do not necessarily interact with each other. They are mere strangers. So how can they actually do what? So how can they actually make up a group? Okay. Here, like I said, the very basic definition or basic explanation of a group is that it is a collection of individuals. So here also, one would understand that the basic premise is that such students who give an entrance exam at a particular center would also make up a group. But it is not a group that is bonded. Okay? It is not a group where there is interaction. Perhaps they might even smile at each other, or they might even talk to each other at the end of the paper or before the paper while standing in line. But the interaction is very, very minimal. But they would still make up a group. Do you follow, Raza? But the depth of the group would be, of course, very shallow. Okay? The interaction would be very minimal. But let's say, for example, a group of people who give the entrance exam start interacting with each other. They find not only a common purpose of giving a particular exam, but they find that they have also shared interests, shared values, start liking each other. After talking to each other, they find that they have many, many things in common. So they might exchange numbers, and therefore they might form a clique or a small group of friends. Are you following, Raza?
Yes, ma'am. But what is the difference between that person? You have given example early.
Instrumental group.
We are going. We are going. No, ma'am. We are going to just like cafe, and we are purchasing a coffee. And over there, maybe so many person, so many students is purchasing a coffee. And after that also over there, वहाँ पे भी एक ग्रुप बनता है. वो एक पे कर रहे हैं कोई और कोई परचेस कर रहे हैं कॉफी. उसमें और इसमें क्या डिफरेंस है? वहाँ पे भी इंडिविजुअल टॉकिंग नहीं हो रहा.
Now, when we look at classifications of groups later, Raza, perhaps it will be clearer. But essentially, what I'm trying to state, when we look at the nature of a group, when people congregate or are in a particular place at a particular time together, that is also known as a group. But because they have a specific purpose of either, like you said, entering a cafe to buy tea or coffee or some eatables, the purpose is to get something, right? To eat or to drink. Yes or no? That's why they make up a particular group. But let's say that there is suddenly an earthquake and everyone in that cafe start going under the table, start helping each other out. Therefore, the sense of connectedness will become much more for that group. Do you follow? Now here you have to be a little careful that when we look at these different explanations that different scholars give, and even from our own commonsensical understanding of what a group is, there are also different types of groups. Do you follow? So the how cohesive a group is in terms of how connected, how bonded a group is, would also differ from group to group. So people standing waiting for a bus is also a group, but they are not the same as, let's say, your class group, where there's a lot of frequency of interaction, where there's a lot of connectedness by virtue of pursuing a particular course of study, of meeting regularly either online right now or even in class earlier. So groups would also differ. Do you follow? And there are, of course, different types of groups. Do you follow? So people watching a cricket match, or people watching a football game in the stadium, the spectators, they are also a group of people. Why? Because they all are gathering together to watch a particular match between players. Are you following? Yes,
Yes,
Raza?
ma'am. But
Okay.
ma'am, so we can say if we are going to attending any marriage party and over there we are taking any food, so maybe it's called group.
You have to understand, I think you really are taking you are confused in the sense that you're trying to apply the explanation of a group in toto to all different there are different types of groups, like I said. There are informal groups, there are formal groups, there are affiliative groups, there are instrumental groups. Okay, there are groups that are high on what is known as intentativity, okay, which is a characteristic of a group, which we'll look at later. Okay, there are groups also, for example, there are primary groups. Your family is a group, but let's say, for example, you and your friends buying a ticket for a movie, or you and your friends being out in the park would also make out a group. Why? Because people are there congregating together, but the nature and type of the group processes are different from group to group. So don't get confused by saying that, you know, people standing waiting for a cup of tea in a coffee cannot be equated. Now the term is they cannot be equated or cannot be seen as the same as, let's say, for example, a group of close friends hanging out together. Do you follow? Okay, you have to understand, like I said, the term, when we talk about the explanation that Haslam, for example, gives, the explanation, for example, that Lindgren gives for groups, they essentially, these scholars and many other scholars said essentially that when we talk of a group, we have to understand the group, the nature of the group in terms of a collection of individuals. And I've just started with the first, that it has to have a purpose. Okay, and there are many other characteristics. Do you understand, Raza? So how a group can be understood would differ in terms of the type of group that it is, in terms of the nature of the group in itself, and how the members interact or do not interact with each other. So family members of yours and other people who are in a marriage party, yes, they are in one place at one time, meeting the purpose of attending a marriage party. That's why they make up a group. But they are not necessarily a close group, a well-bonded group, because there are many strangers who are attending the same party. Are you following?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
You have to, first let's go into the different characteristics, and perhaps there'll be better clarity for you. Okay. There are many comments in the chat box. If you see, some said there's a quasi group, common identity group. Suhana is saying very correct. We'll look at that a little later. Or, for example, yes, many have mentioned that even groups are formed on the basis of a category. For example, you've mentioned, many of you who shared that day, and those of you who've also written, for example, groups on the basis of religion, on the basis of language, on the basis of even your university membership. That is also what? These are different categories that to which we become members of. Okay. Now let's go back. Tushar, I think is already in the classroom. Yes, Tushar?
Yes, ma'am.
Somebody has written earlier. Anyway, let's come back to here. So let's look at the first characteristic, like I said, is essentially the fact that all groups have a purpose. And it's on the basis of that purpose that the group goals are made. It is on the basis of the purpose that the group activities are essentially what? The group activities are essentially outlined. So for example, as I've said earlier, that if your class is a group with the purpose of obtaining a degree or obtaining knowledge or just enjoying the time of being together as a group of batchmates for different reasons, and it is largely subjective, but for most group members who are part of a group, the purpose of being part of a group would also be reflected in the goals of the group. Okay, so in this context, one would say that for instrumental groups, as I've given the example earlier, let's say a panel of experts who are interviewing candidates for a job or interviewing applicants for a particular course, they are formed for a purpose of selection of a candidate for a job or selection of a candidate for a particular course, and therefore they disband or disperse. Okay, they are dissolved once the decision is arrived at, or once the job is done. But for affiliative groups which are formed on the basis, or rather which are formed largely for social reasons, for example, you might become a member of a particular club, a social club, okay, because you want to also interact with others, fraternize with others, affiliate with others for various reasons. Or you might become a member of a political party or an ideological party or an ideological group because you have shared similar ideologies. So all of these would be because you want to affiliate, not because you want to do a particular job like the instrumental group, but because you want or you have the desire to affiliate with others who have similar interests, who have similar likes, who have, let's say, shared orientations, and hence you become part of that affiliative group. And therefore, membership in such group also boosts your self-esteem. It contributes to your sense of self-worth. It also gives you pleasure. And not only pleasure, but it also sometimes adds to your prestige. Do you follow? That's why people, for example, we know, I mean, in general, it's understood that the Delhi Golf Club is a very prestigious social club. And some say that it is the tag of the fact that if you become a member, then you are an elite. Okay? It adds a lot to the personal prestige of group members. Okay, so here one would say that this kind of group, becoming part of a particular club, let's say, joining a particular group, like I said, for various reasons, would be affiliative groups. Are you all with me? Yes?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so that is one characteristic. What is the first characteristic? Yes? The purpose of the group.
Purpose.
Okay. The second, when we talk of groups and how groups work. Now, the second is that when we become part of a group, as group members, we also share certain perceptions of how we should behave as members of that particular group. Okay. So let's say you all as a group of BA Honours Semester 3 students in social psychology. Okay, you know that you are part of the larger group, which is the university, which make up or which comprise of different departments and of different courses, even within departments. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.
Vaishnavi? Okay, my mic is on at full, so I don't know, and I'm trying to speak a little loudly. So anyway, when we become part of a group, there are also what also emerges, is the fact that group norms emerge from group members about what is acceptable in terms of behaviors or in terms of our behavior as members of a particular group. So these perceptions about acceptable behavior make up group norms. So group norms essentially are nothing but expectations about the kind of behaviors that are required of group members. Okay, that are required of group members. So the first is that groups have to have a purpose. The second is that when groups are formed, group members also, in fact, do what? They also, in fact, carry out certain behaviors which are in line with certain group norms. And these group norms are nothing but expectations concerning what is acceptable or what are acceptable in terms of the behaviors that are required of group members. And that's why these group norms influence individual behavior. Okay, for example, my son plays football very, very actively and he's part of a club. And there are always matches between clubs. So as a member of his football club, okay, let's say the football club has a particular name. So as a member of this particular football club, there are certain norms that he has to abide by. For example, he has to wear a uniform so that he can be identified as belonging to this club, particularly when there are matches with other clubs. And not only that, he has to be disciplined. Okay, he has to engage in exercises before the matches start, especially like I said, if there are tournaments. So, and not only that, he should also in fact be physically fit. So all of these group norms in fact guide how members should behave, how members should be, that might differentiate them from other groups. Okay, that might make them unique when it comes to comparisons with other group. So these norms, like I said, sometimes are formalized either by the group itself, or sometimes they emerge by convention. For example, let's say as a parent, as a mother or as a parent with a child who belongs to a particular football club, when I go to watch his tournaments or matches, and what happens is that as parents of children who play in those matches, there are certain norms that emerge by virtue of us being spectator parents. For example, we know that we clap when they're playing well or even not playing well, or we clap for the other group as well to encourage morale of sportsmanship between children. Okay, so let's say clapping is one norm of being part of a particular match, or like I said, being regular for practice, or for example, ensuring that the children wear the uniform when they actually attend group matches or when they actually go out to play for such matches. Are you following? So in this context, group norms emerge. Or your group norm as a class, for example, is to be on time for your classes. You may abide or you may not necessarily abide. But that is a norm that is expected by the institution. That students should be regular, students should be attentive, students should submit assignments. So these are group norms that emerge by virtue of belonging to a particular group, a formal group, let's say, such as yours. Or if it's an informal group, such as a group amongst people who make up and are friends with each other, the expectation, the group norm of, let's say, being honest with each other, the group norm of being responsible for each other, the group norm, let's say, of also being trusting of each other, the group norm of being supportive of each other. So all of these norms emerge when you become part of a group. Either, like I said, they become very, very formalized, okay, especially in groups which are formal in nature. Let's say, for example, I'm part of a group, the teaching fraternity in Jamia, but particularly to that of the Department of Psychology. So there are certain group norms that are unset, even though when we join the service in Jamia or any other central university or even state universities or colleges, we have to sign and say that we abide by what is known as a code of conduct. So these are norms. Be, responsible to teach students, okay, to also be regular, to also perform any duty that the university gives. For example, yesterday, all teachers, we were doing private exams duty, invigilation duty. So we cannot say no. So these are certain norms that emerge when you become part of a group. Are you all following? Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
So that is one characteristic when you become part of a particular group. The third key element of groups, when we are trying to understand the nature of group, is that besides the purpose that a group or groups have, besides the fact that there are certain norms that guide the behavior of group members, you also have, of course, the fact that members are also assigned a particular role. Members in a group are also assigned, or sometimes they might not necessarily be formally assigned, but they might in fact take on a particular role when they become part of a group. For example, somebody, like I said, might be the class representative. That's a formal role by election, okay, to represent the class. So that role is, let's say, for example, I think in the context of your class, you might have 2 or 3 class representatives, right? Okay, or let's say even amongst the teachers, there is the, what do they call this? The, who was Dr. Shushma earlier or right now? Advisor, students advisor. Students advisor. Or let's say I'm the placement coordinator. So there are certain roles that are assigned formally by the group, institutional or otherwise. But we also have roles that are sometimes not formally assigned, but they emerge. So for example, suddenly in your class, let's say, if there is an earthquake and you're all sitting in class, just hypothetically, okay, and somebody just emerges and says, switch off the lights, get under the table, and all of you all follow the instructions of that person. So the person appears to be a leader. Do you follow? So in any situation where there is an aggregate or collection of individuals, sometimes the roles are taken on by individuals informally and they emerge naturally. So that's where, for example, you'll have certain individuals who emerge as leaders and certain individuals, of course, who will be followers, because to be a leader, you also have to have followers. Do you follow? So in this context, certain roles, you can say certain roles that are obtained by members in a particular group, or that are assigned or taken by members in a particular group, is very, very important in group dynamics and also in group work. Now, another characteristic that you also have to remember is that group members always have effective emotional ties to each other. Okay? When you become part of a group, particularly a close-knit, cohesive, that means when we talk about cohesiveness, and we'll look at that a little later in the next few minutes, when we talk about cohesiveness, that means that a cohesive group is one that is very, very strongly bonded to each other, that there is close connection, close interaction, support between one another. So when we talk of group membership also, we have to understand that group members also, particularly in close-knit groups, okay, primary groups, affiliative groups also, group members actually have emotional ties to each other. That's why sometimes as a group we feel let down. Okay, particularly let's say in the coronavirus pandemic that we're all living, where we are comparing who's the first country or nation in the total number of cases. Now, of course, India is second, and I think very soon we're going to become first. Okay, and we probably might even, take the place of America. So we might, in fact, even in terms of our national identity or national identification, okay, we might in fact feel what? We might in fact feel something, either joyous when we perform very well, or we might feel pained or hurt when our category is performing, let's say, not better, at par with other nations as categories. So when we talk of a key element or characteristic of group dynamics or group work or group processes, these affectional, emotional ties between group members is very, very important. Why? Because they also in fact determine whether members like each other or not. Okay, that's why sometimes groups disband or groups dissolve, okay, or groups break up. So that is another one important characteristic. Another important characteristic that we also have to remember is that group members are also interdependent with each other. They are also interdependent with each other. So the group members need each other to meet group goals. That's why, like I said, particularly in an organizational setup or even in an institutional setup, sometimes where teamwork is needed, there is a lot of interdependence, there's a lot of sharing, there's a lot of interaction, there's a lot of give and take between group members. So for example, as teachers, we might have our own respective papers to teach with you all students, but even as teacher and students, let's say you and I might be from different professional, or rather might be from different categories vis-a-vis the teaching learning process, but I need students to teach and you need a teacher also to learn. Okay, do you understand? So there is this sense of interdependence between different members as units of a particular group or category. Okay, and of course you also have, as I've mentioned earlier, cohesiveness. Cohesiveness is very, very important. Why? Because it binds group members together. It acts as a glue that binds members together as part of the group. And when we talk of cohesiveness, cohesiveness is nothing but the strength of the relationship between members of the group. So a group that is not cohesive, that is very, very weak in terms of the relationship between members of a group will break up very, very easily. But a group that is very well connected, well bonded, where the members in fact support each other, where the members in fact interact very frequently with each other, they are totally reliant on each other and they work collectively together as a group, they're the members that will be very, very difficult to break. Okay, so cohesiveness in fact is influenced by many factors. There are many factors that influence whether a group is cohesive or not. The first that you should remember is that for members to become cohesive, for members to like each other, to bond with each other, to share a sense of relationship with each other, the members have to be attracted to each other. So mutual attraction is one factor. Okay, I like you and you like me. Only then can we become part of this group to which we feel we belong. So mutual attraction is one factor that determines how cohesive a group is or will not be. The second factor is that the members have to be close to each other. Okay, here by closeness, I mean physical closeness. So for members to be connected, they have to work together very closely. They have to meet each other very frequently. They have to also, like I said, along with being attracted to each other, they have also, of course, have to be able to work together. So that is a second factor. The third factor that most scholars talk of in group work essentially is that for a group to be cohesive, all members have to adhere to the group norms. All members have to agree that there are certain behaviors which are necessary for group members to actually carry out or to actually show or exhibit. Are you following me? Yes?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And another important factor, so if members, let's say for example, let's say if you take the example of your class as a group, let's say for example, when you're supposed to, you're supposed to put up a show as a class, semester 3 students, but some members say, let's say the purpose is to put on a show in the department. Some members say, okay, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do. Another member say very, very enthusiastically, I will do it. Other members are not even asked if they want to do or not. Okay. And therefore here, essentially, the purpose is going to be defeated. The bond is not going to form. Why? Because there is no interaction. There is no, group work or team effort towards achieving a particular goal in that moment for that group, which is to put up a show by the class. So hence, adherence to group norms and attainment of a group goal is very, very essential to determining whether the group will be cohesive or not. And of course, lastly, group loyalty. How loyal are we to our group? Or are we going to easily leave our group, betray our group, become disloyal to our group, and so on and so forth. Okay. Today, these days, we live in times where we have to wear our nationalism, one would say, on our sleeve. So therefore, you have slogans or you have words like anti-national. Okay. So here, essentially, your loyalty to your nation is what is asked for, sometimes forcefully. Okay. And therefore, your identification with your group is also going to be questioned. So a cohesive group is one in which everyone is loyal. Okay. And everyone, of course, identifies very, very strongly with the group. So here, when we talk about identification, loyalty to the group, social identity theorizing, okay, by different scholars, Tajfel and Turner, Haslam and Reicher and so on and so forth, they talked of the notion that sometimes what binds and acts as a glue for groups is actually their social identity. Okay. And of course, Another factor that we have to remember besides cohesiveness. So cohesiveness is determined by all of these factors: mutual attraction between members, the goal attainment of the group, whether the group abides by the group norms or not, whether the group group members physically interact with each other or not, and lastly, whether group members are loyal and identify with their group or not. So all of these 4 or 5 factors will determine whether your group is a cohesive group or not. And of course, another important feature that we have to remember when we talk about groups and how groups work and in what manner groups work is the fact that there are also status hierarchies in groups. I think all of us know that. Okay? In your class, you might have a student who is very popular with the teachers. Okay? You might have students who are not popular at all. You might have students, let's say for example, who are very smart or even over smart. Or you might have students who are on the other end of the spectrum. So status hierarchies between groups, for example, is very, very evident. And groups also differ in terms of the status that it gives to members in a group. Hence, you have rank in group membership. For example, if you look at the Department of Psychology right now, in terms of the status hierarchies, you have the top, which is the head of the department. Okay, so for teachers and students alike, and even for the clerical staff, we have the head of the department who is the person at the top and attains, or rather, you can say, is in a position of status when it comes to the department as a group. Okay, and if you look at the university in a macro perspective at a larger level, you have the vice chancellor at the top, and then you have, of course, registrar and the other after that, and then you have at the faculty level the dean, and then at the department level you have the HOD. So these are the ranks that are there in groups, particularly informal groups. But in an informal nature also, these status hierarchies are seen. Sometimes, let's say as second year students, you are old timers as opposed to your first year students, okay, who will be entering the batch. So the status hierarchies are also very clearly defined. We are old timers and you are new timers, or freshers we call them. Okay, and therefore you have instances of ragging behavior earlier where seniors would rag their juniors. Okay, why? Because this is very, very typical of the status hierarchies or ranks in particular groups, particularly in educational institutions. And in this context, when we talk of status hierarchies also, there are certain factors that play a particular role. The first is the prototype, the notion of a prototype. And what is a prototype? A prototype is nothing but certain attributes that are central, which are embodied by a person. So if I say a good student, the prototype of a good student would be, I mean, it might be subjective, but let's say for teachers and students alike, a good student would be one who performs very well, okay, who seems to be knowledgeable, who might even be a teacher's pet, so and so on and so forth. So you have the prototype of a good student, or the prototype of a good teacher, or the prototype of a good parent, or even the prototype of a good friend, a good lover, and so on and so forth. Are you all following?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so these prototypical qualities of where you fall when it comes to the ideal. When you talk about a prototype, it is also an ideal notion of a particular category. A good Indian, a good child, a good mother, and so on and so forth. Then, therefore, we accord status according to where the person fares or in what way the person is compared to the prototype of a particular group or category. Do you follow? That's why we choose a leader on the basis of the person, he or she, who is what? Who reflects the prototype of the group. Okay? Who reflects the ideal attributes of what a group member should be like. Another factor that comes very, very easily when we talk about status hierarchy is, of course, the longevity or seniority of the person or persons in a group. Are you following? So, for example, in the department, let's say, even amongst you all as students, as a category. You might refer to your seniors, your BA third year, or even your master's students, okay, in terms of them, especially those who've done their graduation in Jamia and those who go on, of course, to do their MA also from Jamia. You might say that, oh, they have more wisdom because they've been here longer. Okay, so their longevity in the department as a category of students, and of course, not only their longevity, but also the fact that they are perhaps perceived as being more wise because they have been there longer. So similarly amongst teachers, though we do not have seniority and juniors and teachers and academics, but we normally might look to, let's say, the ones who are professors by virtue of the fact that they have been there longer, they understand the system better, they would have better advice to give in certain academic settings or in certain academic situations. Are you following? So all of these are very, very important characteristics that you have to keep in mind when you're actually trying to understand the nature of groups and how groups work. Are you all with me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So, in this context, when we are talking about the nature of groups, so groups can be, as I've mentioned very early on in the class, can be understood as a collection of individuals. I'm merely repeating for your sake, and it is not only a collection of individuals, but the members are bonded with each other. There is a lot of interaction between members, and through interaction, which is verbal or non-verbal, the members also influence each other. There are certain key elements to group work. One, of course, is that all groups have a purpose, and on the basis of the purpose, you have the instrumental group, or you might even have the affiliative group. Secondly, groups in fact are also, group work also leads to the emergence of group norms that guide the behavior of individuals. And group norms are expectations that are perceived by group members to be in tandem with how the group should be. Not only that, but we've seen that in group work or in group processes, there is also the feature of cohesiveness, which refers to what? Which refers to the strength of the relationship between group members. And cohesiveness is also dependent upon mutual attraction between groups, how loyal the group members are, okay, in terms of their membership in the group, or whether they are interested in obtaining the group goals or not, and whether they adhere to the group norms or not, and so on and so forth. Not only that, but there are also the existence of status hierarchies in groups, okay, either informally or formally. And moreover, each member in the group also acquires a particular role as to what he or she should do in the group. Are you all following? So in this manner, these, and of course, the fact that group members are also interdependent, in a state of interdependence with each other as members of a group. And it is through interaction, and because they are interdependent, they also have emotional attachments to other members in the group. Okay, to other members in the group. So these are some of the features that you need to understand when you actually are understanding or are attempting to understand the nature of groups. So I'll stop here today, and then we'll continue tomorrow when we look at the different types or classifications of groups. Any questions? Yes? Any questions you have?
No, ma'am.
No, ma'am.
Okay, I'll take your attendance now. I thought I'll take it in between, but I completely forgot. So Aisha Ehsan is there?
Yes, ma'am.
Ayan Fatima?
Yes, ma'am.
Aditya Mishra?
Yes, ma'am.
Aditya Chaudhary? Aditya Vora?
Present, ma'am.
Aisha? Siddiqui? Akanksha?
Present, ma'am.
Aman Khan?
Present, ma'am.
Amar Abdullah? Ariba Fatima?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, you're the first student today, I think, online. Asma,
Yes. Present, ma'am.
Chinmay, Danish,
Present, ma'am.
Deepika,
Present, ma'am.
Devanshu.
Present, ma'am.
Yes, Devanshu, you're mostly absent. Fakiha,
Present, ma'am.
Fiza,
Present, ma'am.
Hajra,